Good. So I'm calling to find out if you'd like me to have the Zoom call you so you can join uh, our program. Great. Great. So I will call your phone in about 3 or 4 minutes, and all you have to do is answer it and press one. I think I sent you the I gave you the little piece of paper about it last week. Exactly. And then you'll be, yeah. And then you'll, yeah, exactly. There's there's a few other things, a few other tricks that you can pick up if you want, but that's the main one. So you're welcome. All right, I'll call you in just a minute. Okay, bye-bye. Hi, Connie. How are you? Hello, Dodie.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
Good.
So did you enjoy, Dodie, are you in my poetry group or not? Do you get the poem every morning?
I get, no, I don't get, I'm not in the poetry group. I should belong then,
Would like to,
right?
all right, I'll send it to you because
Okay.
you sent me that nice note about the Billy Collins, and
Yeah, right. I've enjoyed him for a number of years. But then I do like poetry. My taste is very eclectic
yeah,
and sort of personal, but I'm not good about discussing it because I always find it that poetry is so, I don't know how to explain. It's intimate, okay?
yeah,
It doesn't always work with me in a discussion group. I sometimes don't even want to know how other people feel.
feel about it, and you don't want to share it. Be fine, but my point about the group is it's just a phone call that comes every morning.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Good. I don't have to respond or,
You don't have to respond. All
oh,
you have to do is pick up the phone and listen to it.
oh, good.
And
And do you choose those poems?
yes, I choose them. So today, I read a Billy Collins poem.
Oh, did you?
Yes,
Which one was it?
it
You
was
remember?
yes, it's called Nightclub. I don't know if you know it.
I I
Hello.
don't know. I have I think a full body of his work, so I'm sure I have it somewhere.
Yeah.
And I can't always remember because after all, I had my 90th birthday this week.
Did you really?
Yeah, or last week, my 90th. Yeah.
I didn't know that, Dodie. Happy birthday.
Well, thank you. It's quite a milestone, isn't it?
Amazing. Connie, you're muted. Connie, just wanted to let you.
Um,
Hello, Sandy.
what?
Hi, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday, Dodie.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sue Carlson said that 90 was the new 70.
Oh
So
yeah.
I feel like I have 20 more years to go.
I agree with that. Yes. We'll take it one day at a time.
Exactly.
I've been there.
Yeah.
To 90 and beyond. So it's all right. So we'll wait a few more minutes. It's great to have. So we have two new people on the call today who have taken advantage of the fact that I can call out because it's not always possible for them to call in. So it's great that I'm very happy that I have this capacity to do this now. So welcome Phyllis Mitzman, who is at 100 Center Street, and Marjorie Glazer, who is also at 100 Center Street. And I'm hoping that soon I will be able to devote some hours to calling people at at Cohen and at Goldman who might be interested in getting phone calls as being called rather than for some people some people their phones can only accept outgoing. I mean, can only accept incoming calls. They can't make outgoing calls to without paying a lot of money. And so there's a bunch of different reasons why it's nice to be able to do this. Hello, Jeannie.
Rabbi, are you coming to 1550 one of these days?
Yes, I'll be there on Wednesday at some point. Come up and,
No,
I'm sorry?
I have these chronicles for you to pick up.
I've had them for like months, and so I'm going to come upstairs,
Okay.
knock on your door on Wednesday.
Okay.
I can't tell you exactly what time because I don't know, but when I'm going to be there. But I'm going to be for the first time, I'm going to be I guess they call it the supervisor, the person who's on call for the afternoon. So I have to go and sit at the desk while the check.
Then you know what? If I know you're there, I'll bring the bag downstairs.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
I also wanted you to look at my books to see if you wanted any books.
Yeah. I probably would love to take them. I just probably am not in a position to take them now because I have no place to put them until
Okay.
the community room at 100 Center Street is where we have the Jewish library. And right now it is still completely filled with supplies. So there's no access to the bookshelf.
Is it well used?
No,
No, I would say it's not very well.
not well used at all. And Rabbi, you're a very expensive man to be sitting at the desk.
That is true, but there are many people in the organization who make a lot more money than I do who sit at the
Then somebody should do something about running this as a business.
Yes. Well,
Stupid.
basically, it's just that when the door checkers take their dinner break, the supervisor sits at the desk. So it's
You could also dispense a little, blessing here and there.
say the rabbi is in. It's a 5-cent deposit, and you can get a little unsolicited advice. So.
Exactly.
All right. So I think we should.
It's worth whatever you pay for it.
Right, exactly. If you only pay a nickel, you can't expect it to be very good advice. Oh, I wonder who's calling. Huh. All right. I'm going to assume it's not important. All right. Okay, so excuse me. We are at a very famous scene, chapter 12. If you have the book, the David Story book, we are on page 257. Right, and so we discussed last week. We discussed the incident of David and Bathsheba, right, and the way that David, in this sort of very ham-handed way, goes about this whole intrigue. And it really doesn't seem worthy of David, the way that he goes about it. Is it Joe?
Yes,
Hi, Joe. Nice to have you. Right.
glad to be here. I can't stay for the whole meeting, but I'll stay as long as I can.
Perfect. All right.
Rabbi, this is Jody. See, I use the computer version, and I don't have page numbers that you do.
My gosh.
Can you tell me what
Yes. Beginning of
chapter?
12. We're at the beginning of chapter 12 of the second book of Samuel.
Rabbi, can you put it up on the screen?
Oh, sure. I can't put the altar on the screen, but I
Whatever you do.
can put the other. Yeah, give me one moment. gotta find it. Leviticus, we need. All right. All right. So we talked about how David did this sort of very clumsy maneuver of picking up with Bathsheba right when she was post-mortal, right, and then arranging for her husband to be killed, right, in a very transparent kind of a way last week, and then we sort of puzzled over the fact that this was the way that David very effective way to run an adultery, and we'll sort of see now that David really seems to be excuse me, I'm sorry I'm moving around, but my computer is getting low on the battery, so I need to. It's amazing how much power Zoom is. So right now, right, we have this. This is annoying. I apologize. Okay. Not really sure. I apologize. All right. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. And now we really haven't seen Nathan. I mean, we haven't seen much of Nathan. And he just sort of shows up here, right? And then Nathan comes with his story, right? The story about the two men, the rich one and the poor one. And David immediately, and I guess this is sort of the question I would have about this story, right? Why is David's anger so greatly kindled, right? Vayichar af David, right? And so when anyone, that means that his nose got really fiery, right? He sort of starts snorting like a dragon. But why is he so angry about this story? What is it about the story that gets him so much?
Are we talking about the you?
Yeah.
It's hard to hear you because you're sitting far. I think you're sitting far away.
Me.
Well, it's an outrageous story. It's very manipulative.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be outraged to hear such a sad story?
Right. But it's interesting to me, right, that he chooses, right? He chooses to. Excuse me. I'll call my phone, and that way it'll sound better. All right. Hope that's better. I hope that's better.
Yes, I think so.
All right, great. So this is the you. So it's as Jeannie says, right? It's kind of an infuriating story. So yeah, there's a good reason for him to be upset. But there's also, the author seems to also suggest, right, that there's this kind of, it's almost as though he's feeling almost kind of guilty about himself, like he sort of recognizes in a way that unconsciously he sort of reacts to it because he sort of senses that that his behavior hasn't been so great. But it's interesting, right? Because then Nathan sort of hangs him up, right? And Nathan said to David, "Thou art the man. Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel." I'll use authors, right? I anointed you king over Israel, and it is I who saved you from the hand of Saul, and I gave you your master's house and your master's wives in your lap, and I gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that be too little, I would give you even as much again. And so God seems very, very, very hurt almost, right? That he sort of takes this as evidence of David's lack of gratitude, right? That you have so much, I gave you so much, and yet it was not enough. And instead of coming to me and asking me for more, right, you just did this crime, right? And so you, why did you despise the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his eyes? Uriah the Hittite you struck down with the sword, right? He himself didn't do it, but you know, of course, it was him who arranged for it. And his wife you took for yourself as wife, and him you have killed by the sword of the Ammonites. And so now the sword shall not swerve from your house evermore, seeing you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Right? This is quite a curse, right? That now the sword will never swerve from your house, right? That your house will now always be defined by the violence of this act. And thus says the Lord, I am about to raise up evil against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your fellow man, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it in secret, but I will do the same thing before all Israel and before the sun. Right, this reminds me a little bit of Michal, right, where Michal says you're willing to dance and expose yourself in front of all of Israel. And here God seems to be saying, you know, because you did this thing supposedly in secret, although it's hard for me to imagine, right, how secret it really was. But God now is going to expose everything that he does to David. And Nathan says, oh, I have offended against the Lord. Chatati ladonai, right? I have sinned, right? I have sinned. And Nathan says, the Lord has also remitted your offense. You shall not die. But since you surely spurn the Lord in this thing, the son born to you is doomed to die. Right? So this means, obviously, I think it means the son that he had with Bathsheba, right? But it also seems that, you know, others of his sons, right, will die. And that's one of the sort of fears that seems to run through the subsequent story, right? The story of Absalom and Amnon, right? There's a rumor eventually that all of the king's sons have been killed by Absalom. It turns out that it's only Amnon who was killed, but David is afraid that it's all of the sons who are killed. And so that this, and I wonder if this sort of the curse, the death sentence here that Nathan proclaims, right? If that's the cause of that fear. Okay. All right.
Rabbi,
please. Yes, please.
I can understand why on a child, an innocent child, why does that punishment have to go to an innocent child?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? And yeah, so thoughts, ideas, responses to Connie's question.
Because
Very primitive, the viewpoints. They're heavy on dying.
Okay, other ideas?
Well,
Connie, you were going to...
It sure makes an impression.
Yeah, right. It certainly is. It certainly is a punishment for David.
Right.
Right. David is the one who has to has to live with this, right? In a sense, right? I mean, it's interesting. There's a reading of the story of Miriam and Aaron, right? When they start complaining about Moses being married to the Cushite woman, right? And they sort of get upset that Moses gets all the attention from God, and what are they, chopped liver, right? And then they're punished, right? And the punishment is that Miriam gets leprosy, and Aaron doesn't get anything, right? And it's sort of this really, so like what's Aaron's punishment, right? And one of the readings of it is that, well, Aaron actually has to deal with the fact that Miriam got the whole physical punishment, right? So he has to bear that guilt, right? So, but I don't know. I mean, it is an awful punishment, right? And it's also a punishment. It's also, hello, Joe. Who is this now? Is it Joe?
I've got a question.
Sure.
I don't know too much about the story, but if David did so many bad things, you know, with family and so forth, why does God pay so much attention to him?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So in the context of this story, Joe,
he should write him off.
Yeah. Well, that's what's it's really an interesting question, right? And I mean, I do think that these questions sort of reverberate down through Jewish history, right? If we're paying attention. If we're not paying attention, right, then it's, you know, David, Melech Israel, Chai, V'kaya, right? I mean, if it's just like David is the king of Israel and everything is great, right? But we know that Jewish history doesn't go that way, right? And if we're paying attention, we hear, right, we see that David's own behavior is what seems to initiate his ultimate sort of downfall. He's a very, as we've said throughout this class, right? He's a very flawed figure, but he seems to be for the up until the incident with Bathsheba, he seems to have this sort of charmed existence, right? Everything he touches turns to gold.
What important, name two important things he did for the Jews that strengthened their position in the world?
I mean, one of the things that go ahead, Ann.
He killed Goliath to begin with.
Right. So he killed Goliath, right? Yeah. He killed Goliath. So he's a very successful warrior, right?
How did that help? How did that help the Jews?
Those things.
I mean, just being a great warrior is a very convenient thing for a country that's beset on all sides by enemies. And he, united all of the tribes under the leadership of Jerusalem, right?
That was important.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So there are other things, other ideas that people have about things that make David sort of worthy of being king. Because I mean, unfortunately, Joe, you're joining us at the point where whatever good stuff he did, is now, we're not focused on that right now. Right now, we're focused on some of the worst things he's done. And your question is a good one. I mean, it's, is there a way to make a punishment, right, that expiates the sin? And the answer to that appears to be no, right? That part of the punishment is that David will go on living and see his sons die, right? Not all of them, of course, but he will, and we'll see as we go on, right, that there are other punishments involving the sons or other tsuris, lots of other tsuris.
Well,
So
Rabbi,
did the
Go ahead,
Jewish,
Dodie.
Rabbi, do you think that the punishment fit the crime? I
Well,
mean,
that's a great question. I don't have a sense of that. Right. That's a great question. Does this punishment, right, the death of his sons, right, from beloved sons, to a son that is, barely been born, has just been born, right? Is that an appropriate punishment for his crimes, right? Which is stealing another man's wife and then arranging for that guy to be killed. It's a pretty heavy duty
That's the
crime.
crime.
right.
Yeah.
I'd like to
Yeah.
raise another question.
Please, Phyllis.
Rather than focusing on this one bad act, David is responsible for a number of bad acts from now
yes.
on, right?
Yes.
And what is the point of the story? So why is David held up as an example? And why is he a very, very human example? So he's not a semi-godlike hero in any sense.
No. Right.
And maybe
No,
that's the point of it all, to show that he's human with human faults.
I mean, I think that's a big part of it, right? We've discussed, in previous sessions, right, the degree to which the Bible does not pull any punches about its characters. Even God, whom you would think would come across as always the hero, comes across not so well in many instances, and which is a very one of the fascinating things about the Bible, right? And one of the things that Jews over the centuries have been, not always so comfortable with, right? Dealing with the fact that the Bible is so forthright.
Yeah, I think that's what it's trying to tell us.
Yeah.
And I'm
Right.
on the point when he arranges for the murder, that
Yeah.
he's more than just a little bit. And so I choose to leave all this behind.
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting, right, is that certainly if if the story is so disturbing that you can't read it, then that is, I think, understandable. And there's a lot of stories in the Bible that are really, really troubling. But I think one of the points of this, right, about the Bible, right, is that it's a document about humans as much as it's about God, right, and it sort of demonstrates the fullness of human experience, which, as I think we can all agree, is not always very pretty. Go ahead, Dodie.
question? I've got a question.
Yeah, 1 second. Dodie had a question, I think, and then Joe.
Okay.
This is just a quick comment. I don't want to run this into the ground, but God isn't saying at this point that this is a cumulative punishment for all your bad things, and therefore
No.
it seemingly seems a little, I feel, too harsh for the crime, but then I'm not God. And
Right.
but the thing is that God is outlining exactly what David did, exactly how he's going to punish him, and that's all I'm trying to point out, that it's not a cumulative punishment. It's a
No,
harsh
I think that's right.
It's a harsh
Right.
punishment, and
It's a harsh punishment, right? It's a harsh punishment. But what's interesting, Dodie, is that the punishment, right, generally for murder is death, right? So God is already sort of, shall we say, commuting that punishment, right? He's not going to kill David, right? Instead, as Connie points out, right, in a sense, the punishment is in a sense even worse, right? It's the death of his son. Yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it was. The punishment was very severe. Wasn't there anybody in second command that the God could dismiss David with his behavior and give us the backup person?
Well, actually, that's what's really interesting about it. It's a great point, Joe, right? Because as we read, so let's hold that question. It's a very important one, I think. So let's hold that question. Jeannie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't have an answer, but just that in every transaction between people, it's not between individuals. It's always between my house and your house. Everyone is the son of someone. Everything has to do with, you're not making a contract between two people or a covenant or any transaction. It's always for generations to come.
Yes.
And so
Right.
maybe it's not surprising that who's included in the punishment is not limited to the individual, but it goes through the generations. Everything is about being
Right.
fruitful and multiplying and
Yes.
what's the word?
Right. I think that's a really important
Generating
point.
more, so.
Right, exactly, Jeannie. I think that's a very important point here, right? Because, well, let's continue the story, right? So Nathan went to his house. So Nathan goes off, and God afflicted the child whom Bathsheba, wife of Uriah the Hittite, had borne David, right? Very interesting, right? So this might point a little bit, Connie, to why, the sort of very cold calculus, right, that would lead to this punishment, right? Because Bathsheba, when in the context of bearing this child, right, she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, right? So in a sense, it's not, David doesn't have, in some sense, right, David doesn't have the right to claim this child as his heir. Because by rights, it's Uriah's. He wanted to make it into Uriah's child, right, by getting Uriah to sleep with his wife. And David implored God for the sake of the lad. And David fasted, and he came and spent the night lying on the ground. And the elders of his house rose over him to rouse him up from the ground. But he would not, nor did he partake of food with them. And it happened on the seventh day that the child died. And very interesting, right? It's 7 days. It's like the mourning period, right? He's mourning the child for 7 days before the child dies, right? And David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, look, while the child was alive, we spoke to him and he did not heed our voice. And how can we say to him the child is dead? He will do some harm. And David saw that his servants were whispering to each other, and David understood that the child was dead, right? He gets it. He gets it that the child is dead, and he said, "Is the child dead?"
Rabbi,
Yes,
I'm going to have to leave you now, and
Sounds
I'll
good,
see
Joe.
you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. It's always a
Okay.
joy to be with you in the group. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Bye-bye.
So glad you joined us.
Hi, Joe.
Sure.
Talk to you
Bye,
soon.
Joe.
Bye bye.
You can make us some hamburgers if you want. It's up to you. All right. So, and so as soon as he's told, right, and David rose from the ground and bathed and rubbed himself with oil and changed his garments and came into the house of the Lord and worshiped and came back to his house and asked for food. Right? Very interesting behavior, right? That as soon as the child is dead, right, David sort of, in a sense, it's almost like the end of Yom Kippur, right? It's like he's been mourning for the child and also doing the kind of self-denial that one would practice for Yom Kippur. Not eating, lying on the ground, right? Not anointing himself, so a very odd kind of behavior. Go ahead, Jeannie.
What is the significance of anointing one's head with oil?
It's basically like taking care of yourself. It's self-care. People would anoint themselves with oil sort of the way that we would take a shower, basically.
A shower. Could you please
Yeah.
move the thing so we could see it?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right.
I just wanted to add, I've noted before that it's the language and the story the language is very sparse. Very few details
Yes.
are given, obviously. And one thing that's always added is food. They ate
Yes.
and they didn't eat. And sometimes we're
Right.
told the few simple little things that they did eat.
Yes, right. It's very interesting when you have a narrative like this, as Jeannie points out, right, that is so sparing of detail. Every detail that you do get seems to resonate, right? It seems to have some sort of importance. So yeah, and eating is really important. And what are the things that he did, right? He got up, he bathed, he rubbed himself with oil, changed his garments, right, and came into the house of the Lord, right? He goes and he prays. He switches from fasting as a way of communicating with God to praying as the way of, and he ate, right? And the servants are so surprised. They're like, I don't get it. Usually this is behavior that you exhibit when someone dies, right? You go through all this stuff, and after the mourning period, you get up. But no, in this case, right, he did it. And he said, right, he seems, now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I am going to him, and he will not come back to me. Right? This is such a chilling sentence, right? He sort of recognizes in some sort of very deep way that this is the beginning of the end of his life, right? That somehow this child's death marks a transition for him. But then exactly what does he do then, right? And David consoled Bathsheba, his wife, right? Now notice this, right? The last time we mentioned Bathsheba, who was she? She was the wife of Uriah, right? Now Bathsheba is his wife, right? And he came to her and lay with her, and she bore a son and called his name Shlomo, right? Solomon. Shlomo, from the word, his peace is what it is. And the Lord loved him, right? What a contrast, right? What an amazing shift, right? All of a sudden, the Lord loved him, and he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet and called his name Jedediah by the grace of the Lord, right? So, in a sense, right, it's pretty clear.
I don't understand that.
In what sense?
Who was called Jedediah?
Solomon. So Solomon has two names.
Oh.
Yeah. So Solomon has two names, which is unusual, right? Because usually it is the woman who names her child. Right? We have many attestations of that in the Torah, and so it's not a surprise at all, right, that Bathsheba is the one who names him Shlomo, but God also gives him a name, through Nathan, right, Jedediah, and so it sort of indicates right away, right? It seems to indicate Solomon's special relationship with God, right? And so in this way as well, right, we have this we begin to see, just like we saw the pendulum swing away from Saul towards David, now we see it sort of swinging back away from David and towards Solomon. Obviously, there's a lot more going on here. There's a lot more story, but go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, it seems that this is blessing a crime. I mean, the child of Bathsheba and David, the first one, died, but we're sure God seems to have gotten over it, because now he loves the offspring of this union that came about in such a nefarious way.
Right, exactly. So interesting, right? And puzzling, right? Puzzling that the crime appears to maybe not be the it's very interesting what has changed so much, right? I don't have an answer. Go ahead, Dodi, you have an idea?
Well, no, I didn't know you were going to ask that question. I just wanted to have you clarify one thing, because I wasn't here last week. And did Nathan, who popped up a few chapters back out of the blue,
yes,
is still in this book, but has he ever appeared before, and does he appear after? I mean, is Nathan just part of this David story?
Nathan pops up, as you said, he popped up for the first time a few chapters ago
Yeah.
without any particular introduction.
Right.
It seems to somehow be assumed that the reader knows who he is. He pops up in this chapter, and he'll play a very important role towards the end of David's life. So yeah, he's in it for the long haul.
But he's not in any, yeah, I mean, we know a lot of prophets from the Old
Right.
Testament, but do we know Nathan?
No, not as a prophet, who has a set of written communications from God. No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, great. So yeah, very interesting, this shift, right? And then now we see Joab, right? And we see Joab is battling, right? And he sends this note to David saying, dude, I'm about to capture this main city. If you don't come now, the glory is going to go to me and not to you. And so that pushes David to come and capture the city and to put the Ammonites into forced labor. All right, so let's move to the next chapter, chapter 13.
Can I
Right.
just
So
ask-
go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, we talked a little bit last time about the Israelites. They seem to enslave the people that they conquered.
Yeah.
Is that what they did? So they were slaves in the land of Egypt. And we're supposed to recite when we read the Passover, Haggadah, for we were slaves in the land of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
But that it seems to be okay to enslave other people.
Yep. Very
Just checking.
strange.
Just wanted to check.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think what is very confusing, right, about the Bible in this way, right, is that slavery is both presented as just a fact of life, right? That is the way the world is. People are sold into slavery all the time. Even Israelites can be slaves to other Israelites as a way of paying off debts and so on and so forth, right? And, right, there is this great sort of moral call, right, to treat the stranger kindly, because we were strangers in the land of Egypt, and Egypt did not treat us kindly. Instead, they enslaved us, right? So there's these two, and this is one of the reasons in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, right, there was a lot of justification for chattel slavery based on the Bible, right? And we don't need to go into all the various theories as to why it was okay. But for every time there was an abolitionist, sort of pointing to the kind of verses you're pointing to, right, there would be some sort of pro-slavery figure who would point to the other traditions.
And were you supposed to free your slave after 7 years or something?
If they were Israelitish, yes.
Oh.
If they were Israelite slaves, right? But slaves from other groups, in theory, you could continue to enslave them. Again, this is sort of the economy of the ancient world. The Israelites in the Bible are not unique in this in any way. But remember, it's not chattel slavery. It's not based on skin color. And there were specific laws about how you had to treat your slaves. So anyway, all right. So let's
Bye-bye.
go.
I,
Go ahead, please.
what's interesting in this, I think it's in an original translation, that what they did with the people they conquered, they put them under saws and under harrows of iron and under axes of iron and made them pass through. The further translation is they had them work at the saws and work at the irons, not punishment, as the original indicates or infers.
Interesting. All right, so the next chapter, here we go.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Is this Nathan the same as the Natan, who's the second son of Bathsheba?
No, different. I think it's a different Nathan. Yeah. Different Nathan. Okay. All right. So chapter 13 begins, you know, if chapter 11 sort of starts in motion the terrible stuff that's going to start happening to David and his family, right? Chapter 13 is where really it gets going. And there are a lot of really interesting parallels that Alter points out between this story and the Joseph story in the Torah, right? He sort of says, oh, it's like the Joseph story in reverse, so very interesting kind of series of allusions to the Torah narrative, which, as he suggests, right, he points out, it suggests that this writer was aware of that earlier prose masterpiece, right? The Joseph story in the Book of Genesis is one of the like the Book of Samuel is one of these extended narratives in the Bible that is just among the most incredible prose narratives in world literature, and the fact that the writer of this seems to know about that and to use very interesting allusions says a lot about how the Bible sort of pays attention to itself. And it happened thereafter, Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, David's son, loved her. All right, so just to be clear, right, that these are sons from different mothers, and Absalom and his sister, and then all of Absalom's children they're all beautiful, right? There's something about beauty that is associated with Absalom, and later we'll learn about his hair, right? That he has these luxuriant tresses of hair, and every year they get cut off, and it weighs, and the hair weighs a certain amount of it's like worth weighing the hair. I mean, I'm so jealous when I think of Absalom and all his hair. But what can you do? You get the head of hair you get. And Amnon was so distressed that he fell sick over Tamar, his sister, for she was a virgin, and it seemed beyond Amnon to do anything to her. Right. So this language, the way he's translated it, makes it fairly clear, right, that this is lust, right? This is a illicit kind of a lust. This is not the kind of love that turns into that's lasting, right? It's purely physical, and later on, Alter will compare it to the love that Dinah had, that Shem had for Dinah in the Bible, where after he abducts her, right, he wants to marry her, right? And here it's the opposite, right? Once Amnon rapes Tamar, he wants to get rid of her. His lust turns immediately to hate. And Amnon had a companion named Yonadab, son of Shimeah, brother of David, and he'll pop up again in a later part of the story. Right? Yonadab was a very wise man, right? He knew the ways of the world. And he said to him, "Why are you so poorly, Prince, morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" And Amnon said to him, "Tamar, the sister of Absalom, my brother, I do love." And Yonadab said to him, "Lie in your bed and play sick. And when your brother comes to see you, say to him, 'Let Tamar, my sister, pray. Come and nourish me with food and prepare the nourishment before my eyes, so that I may see and eat from her hand.'" Right? And so one of the questions is Yonadab comes up with this plan to get Tamar into into the room with Amnon, right? But it's not clear to me or to Alter, right? Did he foresee, right, that Amnon wouldn't just sort of make a proposal to Tamar, but would actually physically assault her, right? So Amnon, and so notice here, right? He says, when your brother comes to see you, right? When Amnon, presumably when Absalom comes to see you, right? Ask him to send his sister. So Amnon lay down and played sick, and the king came to see. The king came to see him. So Absalom didn't come, right? David came. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, how could this be innocent? The question is, did John, or John, whatever his name is, Jonadab, did he have, this plot in mind? I mean, it couldn't have gone anywhere good because Amnon would not have been able to marry Tamar. Is that correct?
Right. I think
So
that's right.
Where was this going? How could this be an innocent idea on the part of Jonadab?
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, I guess the question, I don't think it's an innocent idea, but I don't know, maybe he thought that, Amnon would be able to sweet talk her as opposed to having to assault her.
But
I don't know.
Into doing what? What do you mean sweet talk her? To do what?
I mean, to seduce her, right? To seduce her.
But he couldn't be able to marry her.
But he wouldn't be able to marry her, right? I mean,
So
that's the problem, right? I don't think it's innocent at all. I don't think it's innocent at all. The question is, did he have in mind that there would be physical assaults as opposed to just sort of a lover's tryst? But my point here, right, is that Absalom doesn't come. When David comes, right, Amnon says to the king, right, and this is such interesting language, which I had not realized. So I love what Alter has done with this translation, right? He says, let Tamar, my sister, pray, come and shape a couple of heart-shaped dumplings before my eyes, right? So the word shape here, the verb shape is the same root as levav, right? Sort of like let her heart a couple of heart-shaped dumplings, make hearts, basically, that I may take nourishment from her hand, which I find so interesting. Like, why doesn't David pick up on this, right? He's a poet, right? He understands that if you start using this language of heart, that there's probably something going on here. Go ahead, Dodi.
Well, I'm just curious about the heart shape because I've never seen anything in scriptures, or pictures of the heart shape. And we know that our heart is not shaped like that. And when I first read this, I was just amazed that they said heart shape, because I'd like to know what shape that was then.
That's a good question.
Right. It's a great question. And I think that even though I really like the translation, I'll also say that I also really don't like the translation, right? Because it really doesn't have anything to do with hearts, right? So it's purely metaphorical. And the way the idea of a heart-shaped thing makes it feel like it's a literally heart-shaped, right? Like my mother has these heart-shaped molds, and she used to make meatloaf in the shape of hearts, for like Valentine's Day and stuff. I don't think that that's really what's going on. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I was just wondering if we interpreted the heart shape as not objects that are shaped like hearts, but are shaped from the heart. Yes,
I like that. I like that a lot. Right, exactly. So you could read it that way. And I think that would be, a nicer way to read it. But I think it would be hard to ask the average reader, if I'm anything like the average reader, right, to immediately take that as, as a metaphor. Because
why not?
Because I, like Dodi, immediately took it as a literal heart shape. Maybe if he had translated it, let her shape a couple of dumplings, shaped from her heart, or
It's not as poignant. It's
no,
not.
it isn't. It isn't. But anyway, I mean, I agree with you, Phyllis, about, but very, very important, right? Because those two words are later repeated, right?
Yes.
David, right? David sends Tamar. Absalom doesn't send David. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, why? So are they thinking this is a sisterly thing to do? Are we talking about sisterly love here that David has in mind?
I think it's really interesting, right? That Yonadav says, "Oh, ask your brother to send your sister," right? Because my sense is, right, that there's a reason why Amnon disregards that part of the advice, and instead of asking Absalom, right, he asks David, right? And I think that it sort of points to David's sort of growing incompetence, right? I sort of imagine that if he had asked Absalom, right, and he had used this same language, right, Absalom was like, "What do you want with my sister?" Right? And wouldn't send him. But Amnon seems to get that. Go ahead, Dodi.
Well, what makes Jonadab such a wise man? He's a wise guy, isn't he, for setting up this sneaky little plan?
Yeah, I don't like the word wise. I think savvy
Yeah, I
or
think,
conniving. He's conniving.
Yeah, let's see here. Actually, I like the way that the old translation on the screen does it better. Ish chacham me'od, right? So literally chacham, right?
That's why.
You've all heard the Yiddish, right? Is a chacham, right? He's a wise man, right? He's a Torah scholar or whatever. A sage is a chacham, and so but I like the translation here on the screen. Yonadav was a very subtle man, right? That captures it, but it's not.
Better, yeah.
I don't think it's subtle like the. Actually, it would be interesting to go back and remind myself of what epithet is used for the snake in the Garden of Eden, right? I think it's a different word that's just not coming to my tongue. But no, I don't think that it necessarily means in this case, right, wise in the way that we think about wisdom. I think it's much more like worldly wise, right? That might be a better term.
Would there be a different word in Hebrew for shrewd?
Yes, it's a different word for shrewd. I have a Bible right here. Because when I think of the word shrewd in Hebrew, it's the one that's used for the nachash, the snake in the Garden of Eden. So let me see if I can find that.
Yiddish.
Right. Okay. V'hanachash haya arum. That's it. Arum mikol hayat hasadeh. Right. He was the shrewdest of all the beasts of the field.
Interesting.
Right. So that.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is not quite so a loaded a word, chacham, right? But I think that we give wisdom, right, a much very positive valence, and I think that it's a little bit more neutral in the Hebrew. All right, so that's a good point. All right, so then what happens, right, is that Tamar goes, and he was lying down, right, and she took dough and she kneaded it, and she shaped it into hearts before his eyes, and cooked the dumplings, right. So in the Hebrew, right. This is verse 8, right? V'tikach et ha-batzek, v'talash, v'talabev, le'enei, v'tavshel et ha-levivot, right? So you if you have a little bit of Hebrew, right, you'll hear the word for heart in
Good.
there. 5 more minutes. And then what does he do, right? He says, clear out everyone around me, right? And this is what Joseph says when he's about to reveal himself to his brothers, right? And this is a very different valence, obviously, right? And Amnon said to Tamar, right, bring the nourishment into the inner chamber so I may take it from your hand, right? And she did that, and she offered them to him to eat, and he seized her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. Right? So much for sweet talking, right? It's pretty direct. And what does she say, right? She has this long speech, right? Which is, again, and Alter points out that this is another allusion to the Joseph story, right? Because when Joseph is assaulted by Potiphar's wife, right? He also has this sort of long speech like this, God wouldn't approve of this, like, I'm your husband's servant, don't do this, whatever. And then, she ends up accusing him of attempting to rape her. In this case, right, Tamar tries to convince Amnon not to rape her, right? And this, and seems to be saying things that are not factually true, right? Like, I'm sure my father will give me to you, right? But as Jeannie said, right, as far as we know, right, this would be an illegal match. But Amnon did not want to heed her voice, and he overpowered her and abused her and bedded her, right? With very violent language. And Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, right? It's remarkable how this lust turns immediately into hate. And Amnon said, get up and go, right? So this is what, and Alter points out, right, that this is exactly the opposite of what he said before. He said, come lie down, right? And now he says, get up and get, right? And so there's this very neat circle in this terrible event. And then she says, don't, this wrong is greater than the other you did me. Don't send me away now. And he did not want to heed her. And he called in his attendant and said, send this creature, Frey, away from me and bolt the door. Right? And she had on an ornamented tunic, right? This is the Ketonet Pasim, right? Yet another connection to the Joseph story, right? And scholars use this connection, right, in the other direction to point out that, Joseph seems to be, Joseph's physical beauty is described in the way that women's physical beauty is described. And one of the things is, that he has this ornamented tunic, which, as it says, right, that virgin princesses wear. And so she put ashes on her head, and she tore the tunic, right, and she walked away screaming. Right? And Absalom, her brother, met her and said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? For now, my sister, hold your peace. He is your brother. Right? And then the same word, right? You do not take this matter to heart. So again, the heart is here, right? And on one hand, right, this doesn't seem to be very comforting. On the other hand, as Alter points out, he's saying, I will avenge you, but it'll take some time, right? And very interesting, right, that Tamar stayed desolate in the house of Absalom, her brother. She has nowhere else to go. She's no longer now marriageable, so she stays in her brother's house because she can't stay in her father's house. And King David had heard all these things, and he was greatly incensed, right? So he's very angry, but does he do anything? No. Right. And Alter, and I think other commentators point out, right, that they compare it to Jacob, right? When Dinah is abducted by Shechem, right? Jacob is upset but doesn't do anything, right? And that leads to the bloody events of that story. Whereas here, right, David doesn't do anything, right, and it will lead ultimately to, death and destruction. So very interesting, right, that David just sort of is upset but doesn't do anything, and Absalom didn't make any big deal to Amnon, right? So the two clauses in this sentence don't make a lot of sense to me together. And Absalom did not speak with Amnon either evil or good. In the sense of because Absalom hated Amnon for having abused Tamar, his sister, right? And I guess it just means like he's not going to have it out with him in words. He's going to wait until he can get his revenge. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Oh, no, I just muted myself because I probably got a call from Kamala Harris again. But I'm just going to say that Absalom likes his revenge served up cold.
Mm-hmm. Very much, right? And so we'll get to Absalom's revenge next week, right? We have that to look forward to, right? And Absalom and David, again, another sort of incident of David sort of moving into some sort of passivity, right? That he doesn't seem to have any agency, which obviously is not a good place to be if you're the king. All right, so we've lost a couple of people already, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And we will catch up. We will catch up next week. Oh, Ann, did you want to say something? You're muted, Ann.
The assignment for next week, reading assignment.
Yeah. Okay. So let's read the rest. So it'll be chapter 13, verse 23. Well, let's say we'll read let's say we'll read through the end of chapter 16, and we'll see if we can. Yes, I think we'll be able to start moving a little bit faster again as the events become less intense. Although I'm not sure they ever get any less intense.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Phyllis, do you have a book?
Yes, I do.
Great. Okay. Wonderful.
Thank
All right.
you,
Thanks
sir.
again, everybody. Good night.
Thank
Good night.
you. Goodbye.